These are the ancient rice terraces, older than many civilizations still standing today. Hidden from the rush of modern life, they cling to the mountains like living history. But this is not just a story about stone and soil. This is a story about memory, survival, and a journey that would change one man's understanding of home forever. Our story begins with Daniel, a Filipino architect raised overseas, who had spent his life designing glass towers for foreign cities. Steel and concrete were his world. Yet something was missing. After his father's passing, Daniel discovered an old journal filled with sketches of terraces, rivers, and handwritten notes about ancestors from the Cordillera Mountains. The final line read simply, "The land remembers us." Compelled by something he couldn't explain, Daniel booked a one-way ticket to the Philippines, unaware that this journey would pull him out of the present and deep into a past still very much alive. As Daniel's jeepney climbed higher into mountains, the air grew thinner and cooler. The road twisted sharply, hugging cliffs that dropped into clouds. Then suddenly, the terraces appeared, layer upon layer of emerald steps carved into the earth. They seemed endless, defying gravity and logic. These were not ruins. They were alive. Farmers moved slowly along narrow stone paths, tending rice as their ancestors had done for over 2,000 years. Daniel realized instantly that no blueprint he had ever drawn could compare to this masterpiece of human ingenuity and harmony with nature. The elders of the village welcomed Daniel, without questions. Hospitality here was instinctive, not transactional. He was given a place to sleep and a bowl of rice grown on the very terraces he had come to see. That night, by firelight, an old man named Apo Locken told stories of how the terraces were built without modern tools, guided instead by stars, seasons, and collective labor. Every stone had meaning. Every curve followed water's will. Daniel listened, stunned by the realization that this ancient infrastructure had outlived empires, while modern cities crumbled in decades. At sunrise, Daniel followed Apo Locken to the highest terrace. From there, the valley unfolded like a living map. Irrigation channels shimmered as water flowed evenly across levels, guided by gravity and wisdom passed down orally through generations. This was engineering without arrogance. No domination of nature, only cooperation. Apo Locken explained that the terraces were not owned individually. They belonged to the community. Maintenance was shared. Failure was shared. Success was shared. In that moment, Daniel understood that the terraces were not just agricultural systems. They were social contracts carved into mountains. Days passed, and Daniel began to work alongside the farmers. His hands blistered quickly and used the stone and soil. Yet each movement carried purpose. Every task had rhythm. He learned that planting rice was synchronized with lunar cycles, that rituals preceded harvests, and that prayers were whispered into the wind. These practices were not superstition. They were data, refined over centuries. Daniel realized that modern sustainability conferences echoed principles these mountains had practiced long before the word sustainability existed. One evening, a sudden storm rolled in. Rain hammered the terraces relentlessly. Daniel watched anxiously, fearing collapse. But the walls held. Water flowed precisely where it was meant to, spilling gently from level to level. Apo Locken smiled. They were built for this, he said. The terraces were designed not to resist nature, but to absorb its extremes. Floods became nourishment. Storms became renewal. Daniel thought of cities flooding back home, of infrastructure overwhelmed by climate change. Here was a blueprint humanity had ignored at its own peril. As the storm passed, Apo Locken told Daniel the terrace's greatest threat, not nature, but abandonment. Young people were leaving for cities. Concrete promised faster money. Fewer hands remained to maintain the walls. When even one section collapsed, entire systems suffered. Daniel felt a familiar ache. Progress had always demanded sacrifice, but he now questioned what was truly being gained. Was development meant to erase the past, or build upon it? The terraces waited silently, as if asking the same question. Daniel hiked deeper into mountains, visiting other terrace systems hidden beyond tourist routes. Some were cracked and overgrown, others meticulously preserved. Each told a different story. In one village, He met a young woman named Amihan, who had returned after studying environmental science abroad. She spoke of blending ancient knowledge with modern tools, mapping irrigation digitally, reinforcing walls with natural materials, teaching children both coding and farming. "The future doesn't have to erase us," she said. "It can remember." Together, Daniel and Amihan documented the terraces using drones and sketches, combining technology with tradition. But they worked slowly, respectfully, always with elder approval. This was not extraction. This was collaboration. Daniel felt something shift inside him. For the first time, his skills felt aligned with his identity. Architecture was no longer about skylines. It was about stewardship. He began to see the terraces not as relics, but as living cities, horizontal cities, that had mastered resilience long before modern urban planners existed. At a village gathering, Daniel shared his father's journal. The elders recognized names, places, even specific stones drawn decades earlier. His father had stood here once too, searching for the same answers. The realization struck Daniel deeply. This journey was not random. It was inherited. The terraces had called him home through blood and memory. That night, under a sky unpolluted by city lights, Daniel felt a sense of belonging stronger than any he had known in skyscrapers abroad. The rice harvest began weeks later. Entire families worked side by side, laughter echoing across the valley. Food here was not anonymous. Every grain had a story. Daniel learned that rituals of Thanksgiving were as important as planting itself. Gratitude was embedded into survival. He thought of supermarkets, of waste, of disconnect. Here, nothing was wasted. Not food, not effort, not knowledge. The terraces were proof that abundance did not require excess. As news of Daniel and Amihan's work spread, researchers and students arrived, not to exploit but to learn. The terraces became classrooms without walls. Lessons in hydrology, ecology, sociology, and ethics unfolded naturally. The villagers did not oppose progress. They demanded respect. Daniel helped design visitor paths that minimized erosion, structures that blended with the landscape, and policies that returned profits directly to the community. Development, for once, served the people instead of displacing them. Yet challenges remained. Climate change altered rainfall patterns. Typhoons grew stronger. The terraces adapted, but only with care. Daniel proposed a national heritage resilience program, one that treated the terraces not as museum pieces, but as critical infrastructure. He argued that preserving them was not nostalgia. It was preparation. These systems had survived earthquakes, colonization, and war. They held lessons cities desperately needed. Standing once more at the highest terrace, Daniel reflected on how far he had traveled, not in distance, but in perspective. The terraces did not shout. They whispered. They asked humanity to slow down, to listen, to remember that progress without roots collapses. For Daniel, the mountains had rewritten his definition of success. It was no longer about what you build fastest, but what lasts longest. When Daniel finally returned to the city, he carried the terraces with him, not physically but philosophically. His new designs incorporated gravity-fed water systems, communal green spaces, and materials that age gracefully rather than fighting time. He spoke often of the Cordilleras, of farmers who understood resilience intuitively. Slowly, minds opened. The ancient terraces began influencing modern skylines, thousands of miles away. Back in the mountains, life continued as it always had. Slow, deliberate, interconnected. Children learned the names of stones before streets. Elders taught patience in a world addicted to speed. The terraces endured, not because they were indestructible, but because they were cared for. Maintenance was love, repeated daily. The story of the rice terraces is not unique to one region. Across the Philippines, hidden gems like these exist. Quiet, resilient, waiting. They are reminders that innovation did not begin with electricity, and wisdom did not require algorithms. Sometimes, the most advanced systems are those that know when not to grow bigger, but deeper. For travelers who venture beyond beaches and resorts, the terraces offer more than views. They offer perspective. They challenge the idea that the future must abandon the past. They prove that humanity once knew how to build in harmony, and can again if it chooses to remember. Daniel often returns now, not as a visitor, but as a bridge between worlds. His story spreads quietly, like water flowing from terrace to terrace. Change does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows patiently, grain by grain. The ancient rice terraces of the Philippines are not frozen in time. They are evolving conversations between humans and nature. Every repair, every harvest, every ritual adds another sentence to a story still being written. In an age of megacities and megaprojects, these hidden gems remind us that scale is not measured in height, but in impact. A stone placed correctly can outlast a tower placed carelessly. As the sun sets behind the mountains, shadows stretch across the terraces like pages turning. The land remembers those who listen. It forgets those who rush. The terraces stand as quiet proof that progress and preservation are not enemies. They are partners when guided by humility. Long after the noise of cities fades, these mountains will still hold water, rice, and memory. The question is not whether the terraces will survive. It is whether we will learn from them in time. Because hidden in these ancient steps is a blueprint not just for farming, but for living. A blueprint that asks us to build less ego and more balance. To move forward without erasing where we came from. And to remember that sometimes the future waits patiently in the past, carved quietly into the side of the mountain, feeding generations who chose harmony over haste.